Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. Tonight we're continuing on our study on basic prophecy, and we started by looking at chapter 2 of Daniel with the statue of the metals representing the empires. Then we went to Noah's Testament, which is a Dead Sea Scroll, talking about the metal empires. And then we went to Daniel chapter 7 with the beasts in chapter 7, talking about those same empires. So we've got a lot of data showing us the same thing, so we know for sure what we're talking about. So today we're going to look at chapter 8 in Daniel, which is the vision of the ram and the goat. So we're going to do that and then see how those wrap together. And then we're going to have a Q&A like always at the end. So let me go ahead and get started here. So just to brush over what we did last week, this is chapter 7. And with chapter 7, we had a winged lion that Daniel saw. And we saw that was connected with Babylon. And then we saw there was a bear. Remember, it was lopsided. One side was higher than the other. And it represented the Medo-Persian Empire with one side higher, meaning the Persians were more powerful than the Medes. So it was that kind of a thing. And then we had the four-headed leopard. And this represented Greece, which is the next empire. And the empire of Greece would divide into four pieces. So Alexander the Great came in, took over the known world, and then as soon as he died, instead of the kingdom, the entire kingdom being given to one of his sons, that would happen with a king. So the prince would become the next king. Instead of that, it was divided by the four of the generals. It's interesting because he actually had 5 generals, and the prophecy said it would be divided in 4 ways. Right before Alexander died, one of those generals was killed. So they decided at that point to carve everything up in the 4 remaining generals. So it's interesting how a lot of times you look at a prophecy and you think, well, that kind of fits, but it doesn't quite fit. So the prophecy must be off or something, mistranslated, whatever. And when it's time to happen, you'll notice things fall into place very quickly that way. So, and that's really what the prophecy is, God knowing how things come about. And at the time when this prophecy is fulfilled, these things will be in this place. So if they're not quite there yet, you know the prophecy's a little ways off, but will be taken care of exactly perfectly. So this leopard represents Greece, and the 4 heads represent those 4 empires. And then we're going to see something really important. When we get to chapter 11, we're going to see the same basic idea that we talked about, that the first 2 of the 4, which is Greece proper and then Turkey, have nothing to do with Israel. So they're kind of picture as far as Israel is concerned. The other 2, the north and the south, which is the Syrian Empire to the north, Seleucid Empire, and the Egyptian Empire to the south, the Ptolemaic. So those 2, and we see a lot of detail in chapter 11, which we'll get to in a week or so. But this is the 4-headed leopard, so this is Greece also. And then we had the 4th beast, which was nondescript. It's usually called nondescript because it just says it was different than the others. The other 4 were land animals. This is a flying animal. So this is an eagle. So the Roman eagle is a symbol of Rome, and we're getting more detail that way, the symbols of each one. And then at that point, they said that this nondescript beast had 10 horns on its head. And then while he was looking at the 10 horns, another little horn that had a man's face came upon it, and the man's face was blasphemous. And this is talking about the Antichrist. So there is, at the end of the Roman Empire, there's going to be 10 kingdoms. And these 10 kingdoms form an alliance, but they don't come together very well. They're probably too democratic, and there's actually 10. So if you vote on something, it'd be 5 of one, 5, it'd be a tie. So you can't really get anything done. So if you had 3 factions, or maybe 9 or 11, then you could vote and get things done. But in this case, there are 10, they don't do too well. The Antichrist comes in, and remember, these are nations or powers or something. So if it's like Egypt, Syria, Iraq, whatever, like that, those nations. Then the Antichrist is a king of a nation we're going to see in a little bit north of Israel, but it has nothing to do directly with those 10. So the Antichrist is not a king of one of those 10 nations. So the 10 nations come together first and form this empire. They don't do so well. And then sometime into their rule, the Antichrist comes up. Now, the Antichrist is going to take them over and be here for a 7-year period. We see that in Daniel chapter 9. And then, but what's going on here is those nations could form and have this confederacy that doesn't work so well. And it could be a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. We don't know. And so that's why the church fathers talked about the fact that you don't look for the Antichrist until you first see Rome divide. And that was in 395 when it divided. And then after it divides, it goes for a time, however long that is. And then it fizzles out and then kind of revives. When it revives, you'll see these 10 nations connected with the Roman Empire in some way. And so don't even look for the Antichrist, some guy whose name equals 666, for instance, until you see 10 nations. That's the time in which that happens. So very important, amazing lesson from the church fathers. But so this is what he sees, the 10 and the very arrogant little horn. And as he's watching it, what happens is the arrogant little horn it attacks and destroys 3. Now we understand from the prophecies that what happens is he comes in to take over the coalition, and 3 of the 10 absolutely, totally reject, even to the point of not just voting no and whatever happens, happens. But if they vote no and the others vote yes, then they'll secede from the union. They'll attack this guy. They're very, very Antichrist, or whoever the Antichrist is at that point. And this is an interesting thing that we tend to forget a lot of. In the book of Revelation, we have the 10 nations and this going on. And in the first 3.5 years, it says that the Antichrist fights many battles and he wins them all. Okay, so we understand that he's supreme. But you can't fight many battles unless you have many enemies. So there's a good portion of the world that does not like the Antichrist, at least at first. We tend to think that he comes in, swoops in, and then just takes over, and that's just it. But there are many countries, not Christian countries necessarily, or even Christian factions, but there's just people that say, I don't want to be told what to do, more like patriots. Maybe they're Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, Jews, maybe Christians in name at least, or whatever, but they're very independent, do not want to be told what to do. And so they, to the point of going to war. So he fights many battles, but at least in one of these battles, or maybe you consider him 3, he defeats 3 out of the 10 nations. That leaves 7 nations that surrender to his will, or vote him in, or whatever they do, and he becomes the leader of the remaining 7. So he is the 8th. And we see this in the book of Revelation about he's the 8th and is of the 7 and goes to perdition. So those things, we're not sure exactly what they mean, but altogether we have a general idea for sure of what those mean. So we're toward the end of the Roman Empire. It looks like it's fizzled out and then fizzled out basically in 1917 for sure. Tried to revive under Hitler and then fizzled out again. So basically the 2 world wars are the nails in the coffin for the Roman Empire. There's some other factors involved. So the Roman Empire is not completely destroyed yet, according to the prophecies. But when it is, then probably instantly, I would assume, these 10 nations would arise. So we're looking for 10 nations. And I don't see them yet, but that's what we're looking for. And then this is what happens. So as we go on, we ended last week by showing all this comparison. So Daniel chapter 2 is that image, which we have in the center, was the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and then feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. And we learned from Noah's testament that those are different empires. So the head of gold goes along with the winged lion of Babylon. The chest and arms of silver goes along with the lopsided bear, Medo-Persia. Greece, which is seen in Daniel chapter 2, that vision is just one empire. But as we see more clearly in Daniel chapter 7, it's a four-headed leopard. So the one empire fragments into four. And when we look closely at the two empires, we get more information about end time prophecy. That's why that part is important, because Daniel's asking for more information. So then we have the two legs of iron. What's interesting about this is when they took over Israel at 64 BC, they were one empire. So they continued like this until Israel was ceased to exist. The country was basically disintegrated, kind of taken over, made a general territory. There was no more Israel. And then even 100 and some year or 200 and some years later, then finally the Roman Empire divided into two. That was 395 AD. So 395 AD is basically when we see the two legs emerge. So, and this is iron, and it goes all the way down to where we have the feet and toes of iron and clay, which is the two empires mixed. So clay was the old Egyptian empire, and iron was the Roman Empire. And looking at the two legs, both being iron, we have Rome proper, and then from Rome, Constantinople starts, so that's the Eastern division. And then Rome falls in 476, never becomes an empire again as far as headquartered in Rome, Italy, as far as a real empire, a king ruling from Rome with an army, that kind of a thing. But what does happen is 400 years after it falls, the Pope of Rome, who has power over kingdoms, different kind of power, which is what we have to look at. He's not a king with his own army, but he's somebody through manipulation of scripture or thought, ideas anyway, can control kings, and the kings control the armies. So he creates the Holy Roman Empire that lasts for about 1,000 years. So we have one empire in the center, which is Rome, and from Rome comes the Holy Roman Empire in the west and the Byzantine Empire in the east. They continue up till a time. So you've got it going into Germany, ruling under the Kaisers, and then you have the Byzantine Empire falling to the Ottoman Empire, becoming Muslim basically. So it goes from Christian, or from pagan rather, to Christian to Muslim. And that ends, they both end with World War II in 1917. And then they try to revive in 45 and 38, actually, 38 to 45, and then that's World War II. And then they cease to exist. And then within 3 short years, Israel comes to be. And with Israel's coming back as a nation begins what's called the birth pains. And so that stuff is mentioned somewhat by Jesus in Matthew and Mark and Luke. So there's a lot of combination there. And again, there's a lot of each one of those that we don't understand quite yet, but the basics are there. So if we pull them all together, we should understand more of the basics. And the more we figure out, the more theories we either prove or disprove, the better off that we'll be. So at that point, we get the 10 toes, which hasn't happened yet. That's still future prophecy. And that's the same as the 10 horns on the nondescript beast. So if the nondescript beast, the eagle, is Rome, and the iron legs are Rome, that specifically, instead of an empire, we get more specific, and the empire fractures into 2. And at one point, it fractures into 3. And at one point, there's a gap in the leg, if you want to, use that analogy. But so there's other things, but when we get toward the end, there's only going to be 2 again. And these 2 end up forming probably 5 nations in one and 5 nations in the other. So my guess would be 5 nations in Europe and 5 nations in the Middle East. How that comes to be is kind of questionable. People talk about today, as far as a 10 nation or a 10 group of anything, there's the BRICS, which are voting to make certain members, certain countries members. And so this would be individual countries that join an alliance of 10. So back in the 80s, we had the first time that something like that happened was the European Common Market. And the original group consisted of 10. And we all thought, okay, there's the 10 nations. Now we got to start looking for the Antichrist. Europe was part of the Holy Roman Empire, so that fits. And so it could be that. But then they went from 10 to 27. And then finally England, dropped out. So that was one of the founding members. So that's kind of all been disintegrated now. And they've kind of redone everything. And now they're back to having a kind of a north and a south. And but 10 nations may come of it, or 5 specifically. So, but this BRICS could be something. So anything, I have my own theories, but they're just theories. So what we want to do, following the church fathers' advice, is to look for anything that is a 10 nation something, or a 10 group something. Be it all in Europe, all in the Middle East, half and half, or some sort of percentage, something like that. We're looking for a 10 something. They have to form, and when they form, it'll be very clear that that's them. Then after that, sometime after that, like I say, a year, 5 years, 50 years, something, sometime after they form, then the Antichrist will try to take them over. So could be real close together or far apart, but they rule a very short time with the Antichrist. And that's what we're seeing here. So the head of the nondescript beast, of the eagle, with the 10 horns, same thing as the 10 toes in Daniel. So now let's continue. We'll start looking at chapter 8 and put all of this together. So in chapter 8, we have the prophecy of the ram and the goat. Okay, and so basically he is talking about at a certain time he has this vision, and we'll focus on the vision. So we'll start in verse 3. So this is Daniel chapter 8, verses 3 and 4. And he says, I lifted up my eyes, and I saw, behold, there stood before the river a ram. And I didn't get the first part of this, but the river is the river at Shushan. So he sees this vision. I don't know where he's at, but he has this vision of the river Shushan, the river at Shushan. Shushan was the capital. So basically he's in Persia, if you think about it, or in the dream at least. He's seeing that he's in Persia, and this is where I'm at. And all of a sudden this ram appears. So one of the things is we're getting from symbolic things to more and more literal. So a leopard is a fast-moving creature, which is what Greece did when they attacked. But specifically, the animal that a symbol of Greece anciently was a goat. And the symbol of a Persian king, or the Persians, was a ram. Much like today, we have a Russian bear, a American eagle, a British lion, different things like that. So, and not to confuse these, but this is specifically ancient history. So when you see a ram and a goat, your first thought should be Greece and Persia. But Greece is nothing right now, so I don't know why I'd be dreaming about Greece. It's that kind of a thing. So you've got a goat and a ram. So he says he's in Shushan. He lifts up his eyes, and there stood on the river a ram, and it had 2 horns. The 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. So you can see this pattern. This ram has 2 horns, one horn higher than the other. When we go back to the previous chapter, it was a bear that was lopsided. One side was higher than the other. So obviously the bear is the same thing as the ram. Well, the ram is Persia for sure, so the bear must be Persia. So we're kind of pulling all these things together. So it says, and I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward. It's already in the east, so it doesn't go east, but it pushes out of the Persian mountains or the Iranian mountains, those other directions. And it says that no beasts, and of course a beast would be another Gentile power, a nation of some sort. So there's no other nations that stood before it. Persia basically took over everybody to a point. So no beast could stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand. But he did according to his will, and he became great. Remember, in the bear had 3 ribs in its mouth. And we said that was a coalition of three kingdoms that went together to try to destroy the Medo-Persian Empire, 3 against 2, but it wasn't strong enough. So no one could deliver out of his hand, even a coalition like that. So this ram is powerful, the most powerful beast on the planet at the moment, is what he's seeing. So then we go to the next 2 verses 5 and 6. It says, I was considering this. So he's marveling at this amazing ram. You know, he's looking at the ram, thinking about it. And as he's considering it, he says, behold, a goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and it touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn before its eyes. And he came to the ram that had the 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran into him with fury and power. So again, this would be Greece coming against Persia. Persia is strong. Greece is a group of city-states that can't ever agree on anything, kind of like those 10 nations. So if you can't agree, there's no power. Alexander the Great comes to power, pulls the city-states together, and forms an empire. So at that point, they become strong. So he, as it's going to tell us in a little bit, he is the notable horn on the goat's head. So as you see it here, you've got the 2 horns on the Persian ram, and then this Grecian goat, a uni-goat, if you want to think about it that way, with this notable horn between its head. So that's Alexander. And as we learned from the 4-headed leopard, the kingdom, once he dies, is split into 4 pieces. So let's continue this vision. So he flies fast, almost like he's not even touching the ground. So that's a sus, or a flying object, a very herd object. And so in the other symbols, he is a leopard. A leopard is one of the fastest moving cats, one of the fastest moving land animals, if you want to call it that way. So it's the kind of thing that if you watch a leopard attack its prey, it's almost like it's not even touching the ground. It's just kind of traveling straight. So that's what we're seeing here. So this goat, this uni-goat, comes very quick and full of fury and attacks the ram. It says, and I saw him come close to the ram, verse 7. He was moved with choler, that means extreme anger, against him. He smote the ram and broke its 2 horns, both horns, Medes and Persians, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. And he cast him to the ground and stomped upon him, and there was none who could deliver the ram out of his hand. Whereas, you know, a few generations back, no one could deliver anyone out of the ram's power. Now nobody can deliver anyone, including the ram, out of the goat's power. So that's what we're seeing. Let's see here. Okay, so let's go on. So then we get to verse 8. So this is what he sees. I saw him come close to the ram. He was moved with choler against him, and he smote the ram and broke the 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to stand before him. He was cast down to the ground and stamped upon him, and none could deliver him. I think I repeated that. So what happens is the horn breaks, and out of what the broken horn, these 4 other horns come up. And you can see these here. So again, historically, we know the kingdom of Greece, when it was broken up, was Greece proper, called Macedonia. And then there was Asia Minor, or Turkey, using modern terms. And then the Silurian Empire to the north, which is in the Syrian area. And then the Ptolemaic Empire that took over Egypt, you know, with Antony and Cleopatra and those things. So we have these 4 then. It's Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt. Those are the 4. And what we're going to see in chapter 10 is that the Antichrist becomes known as the king of the north. So he's not the king of Egypt. So that's at least one clue. The Antichrist does not come from Egypt. Egypt is one of those that absolutely hates the Antichrist and goes to war with him. And of course they lose, but that just gives us one clue. So the Antichrist is not from Egypt. And Egypt possibly is one of the 10. Hippolytus in his work on the end times of the Antichrist makes a good argument for chapter 11, which we haven't got to yet, but in chapter 11 of Daniel, describing 3 groups or 3 nations that come against the Antichrist, and it's specifically Egypt, Libya, and what we would call Sudan, or the country south of Egypt. And now, of course, Sudan is broke up into North and South Sudan. So if you were to take Egypt, if it was to be ruled by radical Muslims, and then we know that Sudan and Libya are the ones that are fairly radical terroristic groups. The slave trade, the Muslim slave trade, which was all through the Middle East, attacking, Europeans and Americans. Remember, that's the reason why the Marines were created, specifically to battle the Barbary pirates, which is the Muslim slave trade at Tripoli and the others. So anyway, that's if you go back and listen carefully to the anthem of the Marines, what that's for. So anyway, so that's what's going on. Today, the Muslim slave trade is headquartered in Sudan. I don't know if it still is, but that's the way it was just even a few years ago. So a lot of those things are similar. So they may or may not be the 3 that attack the Antichrist, and they may or may not be Muslim at that time, although they've been Muslim for I don't know how long, and I doubt they're going to change radically in the next, 5 years or something. So that's something to take into consideration also. So Greece and Turkey have nothing to do, never did have anything to do with Israel. So they become out of the picture. So the 2 heads of the leopard, the 2 other horns of the goat, are Syria and Egypt. So very, very important. So here's Daniel 8. I guess I had that in there twice. So therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and from it came 4 notable horns out of the 4 winds of heaven. So, and then I've put in here the 4-headed leopard just to contrast. So the 4-headed leopard and the 4-horned goat are the end of the empire of Greece. So very, very important. So we have to memorize it's Greece, Turkey, Syria, and Egypt are those 4. Now, then it goes on in verse 9 and says, out of one of them, out of one of those horns, so not from the Grecian Empire proper, but from either Greece or Turkey or Syria or Egypt, out of one of those 4 came a little horn. That's our little horn that sets up and destroys 3 of the 10 in Revelation and in Daniel chapter 7, which we looked at last week and we just reviewed. So this little horn came up out of one of them, and it waxed exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. Now the pleasant land would be Israel. South, of course, would be Egypt. Okay. And then it went east. So it did not go west. So we're not talking about Greece or Turkey, because Greece, Turkey, and Syria are all north, directly north Syria, and then northwest would be Turkey and Greece, and then south is Egypt. So if you're talking about the 4, which one of the 4, this guy goes and with forces and attacks east or west rather, and south, and that includes the glorious land or the nation of Israel. So we have to be talking about Syria. And we see that very, very clear in chapter 11, which we'll get to soon. So anyway, so this is Syria we're talking about. So we're being told then that at the end time, when this little horn arises, he comes out of Syria. And this little horn coming out of Syria attacks these 10 nations, which is what we learned in chapter 7. So none of this has happened yet. Now, part of this little horn will be similar things to what Antiochus Epiphanes did, but part of them will not be. And we'll see that line of demarcation very clearly in chapter 11. Then that gives us even more clues about the Antichrist and what he does. So at this point, that's what happens. And then it says, and it, that little horn with the smug face, the little horn waxed great, even to the host of heaven. Now, Any emperor of the entire planet could get arrogant and could cuss God and cuss the angels and all that kind of stuff. I mean, anybody can say anything, but you can't wax great even to the host of heaven. I could cuss out an angel, but I'm sure he could squish me like a bug in 2 seconds. So if I wax great to him where he can't touch me or would have a really hard time destroying me, I might actually destroy him. That's not something a human would do. So again, we're talking about something more human here. So this little horn waxed great even to the host of heaven. So even to the angels. And it came down, or it cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. So what human do you know that could actually incarcerate an angel, do something like that? Now in chapter 8, going forward in Daniel anyway, we have the story of Michael and the, Gabriel wanting to come and explain things to Michael, but he couldn't because the prince of one of these nations withstood him. He had to go back and get Michael to break through the forces. So that tells you that the prince of that nation is not like Antiochus Epiphanes or, Ken Johnson or some guy. There's no way a human being could do that. So we're talking about spiritual powers controlling nations, the princes of those nations. Okay, so that's what he does. So we go on here. Okay, so that's pretty much our study for today. So let's compare these together. So again, here's a chart with all the images put together. And so again, we have the golden head, which is Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. That's the winged lion, so that's Babylon. And so the chest and arms of silver is the Medo-Persian Empire, and that's the bear that's lopsided. One side is higher than the other, which is also the ram, which has one horn higher than the other. So you can see the comparison. And then we get to Greece. Greece is the belly and thighs of brass, just one empire, more specifically, and we don't care except if it has something to do with end time prophecy. So more specifically, it is a leopard. It's a fast-moving creature, but it has 4 heads. And it's also a goat that has 4 horns. So that is very specific for us to know that the Antichrist comes out of one of those horns. And it's not Greece, Turkey, and it's not the one to the south, which is Egypt. So it's from the Syrian Empire. Now, that's not necessarily today's Syria as we know it, but the empire to the north was Lebanon, Syria, probably a little piece of Iraq, probably a little piece of Turkey. So it's that whole area. But Turkey as a whole is not included. And there's some other prophecies in the scrolls about Turkey. So they're definitely not in this group. Turkey's not one of the 10 nations. It's not where the Antichrist comes from because of what it does. It partners with Babylon. So it's not Babylon either, but it's in a unique situation, the country of Turkey. So we're talking about Syria because it's north of the king of the south, or north of Egypt. And so Egypt always attacks northeast when it goes up to attack these things. And we'll see that a lot in chapter 11. So then Greece falls to the Roman Empire, which starts out as the nondescript beast, and it goes for a long time as 2 iron legs, or 2 empires, an east and a west. So Rome fizzles into the Holy Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire, in which we saw that those died out at first, or almost died out, in 1917 with World War I rather. They were revived, or they tried to be revived, by Adolf Hitler in World War II, and he was defeated and everything was recarved up and that kind of stuff. So officially at this point, it looks like the Roman Empire ceased to exist in 1945. And it may or may not have, because at first, if you're just going along time-wise, it continues all the way up to 1917. And at the end of World War I, you would assume, okay, the empire is destroyed and it was never going to come back, but it almost did or you could actually say it kind of did for 7 years for World War II. So again, if there's now it's been a good number of years since that's happened, and there doesn't seem to be an empire per se, at least in that area. So again, there's more things to look at prophetically, but eventually it either comes back or somehow fizzles into these 10 nations. So the nondescript Roman Empire eagle is the 2 iron legs. The feet and toes of clay and iron is the head with the 10 nations. 10 toes, 10 nations. So far in Daniel, this is what we've covered. So for us, we know that these empires continue. We're over here at the tail end, I don't know if you can see my pointer, the tail end here of the Roman Empire, somewhere in that area. Whether it comes back for a bit or is completely gone, either way, we're looking now for 10 nations, which are the 10 toes and the 10 horns, those symbols. Now, this little horn that comes up and attacks and destroys 3 and becomes the leader of the original 10 nations is the same little horn that we see coming from one of the 4 pieces of the Grecian Empire, which it doesn't say directly, but you can pretty easily tell it's the Syrian one, the one north of Israel. So when we get into chapter 11, it will be very specific. It is the northern one, the Syrian one. So this is a good synopsis of Bible prophecy. So again, when you put chapter 2, chapter 7, and chapter 8 together, there's really no way you could confuse these things. The symbols are pretty specific. They're different enough to be different symbols that are describing the same, similar things in each empire and more details in each one. So we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight, and we'll continue this next week. If we go into chapter 9, you will see just that last verse talking about the Antichrist coming in in a 7-year period. That's where we get the 7-year tribulation period. It's the end of chapter 9. And then chapter 10 talks a little bit about the kingdom of Greece and the kingdom of Persia, the things that are going on with Daniel. When you get to chapter 11, and 11 and 12 are really one vision, and they need to be read and studied together, not, 11 is one thing. In this case, and it's very clear that Daniel sees this dream. Nebuchadnezzar has the dream, and then Daniel is told he's got to interpret it without knowing anything about it. So he says, give me a night, I'll go home, I'll pray, and maybe the Lord will show me what he showed you. And he does. So then he interprets the dream. So this is the same dream Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel both had. So the statue is the first vision of Daniel. We can actually say that. The second vision then are going to be these beasts. And the third vision is the ram and the goat. And then we go on up from there. There's other visions. But in chapter 11, it starts off by talking about the first year of Darius the Mede. That's 537 BC when they took over. After him will be 4 Persian kings. The 4th one will stir up Greece, and then Greece will come and destroy the Persian Empire and take over, and then fragment. It'll give us detail, very specific details of all this. And then for the next 20-some verses, it'll show us all about the wars between Syria and Egypt, and how Israel goes back and forth in between each one. And then it switches to Israel being kind of liberated or taken over. The whole area is taken over by the ships of Kittim, which is Rome. And then Rome destroys the temple and burns it very specifically in chapter 11. And then after that time, Israel is dispersed. Then all of a sudden we return to this king of the north, king of the south thing, and Israel is back in their land. So the rest of that chapter is after 1948. And as we'll see, it'll be all about the Antichrist being the king of the north, the king of the Syrian Empire, whatever empire's there at that time. And it's not Turkey, and it's not any one of the original 10. And Egypt and Libya and Sudan apparently are 3 that come against the Antichrist and are destroyed. So that's really specific. Whether or not they're the 3 of the 10 or not is the only questionable part at this point anyway. So we're trying to pull all these together. and we'll continue looking at this next time. So at this point, we'll go ahead and stop, and let me go over to the chat room, and we'll see if we have any questions. Let's see here. So let me switch to our Q&A so we can, okay, let me do it this way. There we go. So we can have a better thing for questions. Okay, Super Chat, $10. Thank you very much for the donations. We appreciate you guys buying the books, studying with us, donating through Give, Send, Go, PayPal, or here in YouTube. And thank you very much. It says he heard Tim Alberino and Gary Stearman speaking of Nephilim technology possibly being preserved through secret societies of today, like Freemasonry and Kabbalah. Do you concur with that? Thank you. The secret societies definitely have secrets, or they always say that they're a society of secrets. And excuse me, in the Masonic Lodge, there's a whole lot of those kind of things, at least on the lower levels. How you interpret them later, I don't know. So it's a possibility. At the very least, I would say the secret societies want to make you think they know more and are in possession of certain things, and are going to glorify themselves or make themselves gods, or, whatever. I'm not saying necessarily Masonic Lodge does that, but secret societies in general. There's Masonic Lodge, there's Odd Fellows, there was the Christadelphians, there were the, there were several subgroups like that. Order of the Rosy Cross. No, that's not Christadelphians. Anyway, there's several of those, and they all have that kind of a thing. Some of them believe in reincarnation. Some of them believe in making yourself into a god, alchemy type things, or the symbols are there. And I think what's interesting about that is the symbols are vague enough that you could create your own system, interpret it the way you want to, which is what a lot of these do, because they don't all teach exactly the same thing, and come together with something like that. Now, whether or not they have real information, like real Nephilim technology or not, that would be something interesting to see. Obviously, the only things we have left are the large megalithic monuments that are put together, and sometimes the stones are actually fused or melted together, which we could do in a laboratory, small amounts. I don't know how you would do that on Earth in the open air and, melt rock like that. Lava could do that, but I mean, we're not talking about a natural formation. So there's a lot of things like that shows that they had a lot of knowledge from somewhere else. As far as other things, cures, long lifespan, technology, I imagine those did exist and probably still do. Whether or not they're connected with those, I'm not sure. But that would be really interesting to see. I know Ellie Marzulli also is doing research into that area, trying to figure out, based on the legends of what's there, if the legends were real, how could that have been done? And if it was, some sort of levitation or something, how do you do that? You could use magnets. You could use, what would they have used? Just trying to backwards engineer some stuff, or to prove or disprove either one of those theories. So it's a good question. Maybe we'll find out sometime in the future. GR asks, before we begin, can I ask you all to please pray for my friend in Dallas? She's scheduled to be euthanized in Canada tomorrow. Oh my goodness. Friend from Dallas is okay. Yeah, Canada has that kind of stuff. Let's just pray for her real quick. Oh, okay. I misread it. Her name is Dallas. Okay. I was wondering how she went from Dallas to Canada. So, okay, well, we'll pray for her. Lord, we lift her up, and whatever the situation is going in, we pray that they change their mind. We pray, number one, that she be saved and have a relationship with you. Lord, we don't know anything else about that, but we just pray that this problem be fixed and that she's not euthanized tomorrow. We thank you and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So you'll have to let us know what happens with that. Renee says, don't forget to hit the like button. Yeah, we have, I don't think it tells me on here, but I think the last time I checked, we have 84,700 subscribers on YouTube. And with that, let me also mention that we have the second YouTube channel, which is going to be just the text. Right now we have 3 Corinthians up, so you can just listen to it like you would Galatians or Ephesians or something. We have, let's see, Gad the Seer. We just finished that. We're working on the Epistle of Barnabas. And then I think we're also working on the Didache at the moment. So we're just reading those, putting them together, having the text up on the screen. So you can go back through those. They're monetized, so hopefully it'll give us a little more income so we can do a few more things. But we just, number one, want to get the information out. And I know there's a lot of sites out there that would have Jasher or have Jubilees or maybe a couple of those or whatever, but I don't know of anyone that has all of them. So that's really what we're trying to create. So we'll have most of those books. Along those lines, if we go to, let me just find something here. Here is our, if I do it right, our website, BibleFacts.org, and this is us tonight doing our stuff. But if we come to our bookstore, I just want to share this with you. As far as translations that we've done the Book of Enoch, and then a book on the order of Melchizedek, which includes most of the chapters in Hebrews, explaining the different orders between Melchizedekian and Levitical priesthood, and then what Paul is contrasting and stuff. We've got the Book of Jubilees. These are English is a fresh English, Enoch rather is a fresh English translation that I did because of the prophecies. They can be garbled really easy. So we did that. Jubilees is pretty much, I tweaked it a little bit, but it's mainly the R.H. Charles version. And so that comes from the Ethiopic. So we know there are problems, at least with some of the numbers in those books. Then there's Gad the Seer, that came out a few years ago. And then the Testaments of the Patriarchs. The Essenes basically said they get their theology or they interpret the Old Testament by the writings of the patriarchs. And that's from Adam to Aaron. According to their tradition, Adam through Aaron, they all wrote a last will and testament. Very interesting moral stories about virtue, and then specifics about the Messiah and prophecy. So very, very interesting, including first coming and second coming. So there's a lot of interesting things in there. We also did one on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, showing you how it works and why that's important, because we can start putting time periods, not necessarily dates down to the day, but small regions of time where things have to happen in, those kind of things. Along those lines, in December, we're going to be at the Prophecy Watchers Conference in Branson. And we'll be talking on some of these prophecies, the ones recently fulfilled in this last war that's still going on, and then some other interesting things coming in the near future. So I love working with Prophecy Watchers. We have a lot of fun when we get together, get to meet a lot of you guys too. So if you go to the Prophecy Watchers website, if you're interested, you can see how to come. So then we have Mysteries of the Essenes. That's actually a book I did with Skywatch TV. What we did is we took Gad the Seer, Testaments of the Patriarchs, and the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, and they put it together. So if you already have the 3, you don't need the 1, or vice versa. We have the Covenant of Damascus, which is the theology of the Essenes. Very, very interesting. A little bit of prophecy, but it's mainly how to prepare when you're in the end times, what to do, what not to do, the basic stuff that's coming, and how to counter it. So there's a lot of good information in that. Then our latest book is the Ancient Prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the rest of the stuff. So anything that's not a testament up here would be in here as far as prophecy is concerned. The bulk of it anyway. There's still a few things to be done. There's new scrolls coming out all the time. So that's our Dead Sea Scroll translation. For ancient translations, we've got Jasher, Barnabas. Barnabas is the one we're in the process of putting up on the second channel now. This will be the text plus the history plus my commentary. And on the second channel, it's just the text, but you can go through and listen to it and see. And then there's the Seder Olam, which is a historical book, 3rd Corinthians. The Ezra Apocalypse is going to have a lot of interesting things dealing with prophecy for the second coming time period and ancient law of kings. And then we have other topics here, basic Christianity series, Bible commentaries, and then other things. So if you're interested in our calendar, that basically disappears around the 1st of October. And so Josh Peck takes the calendar that's online, creates a new one, and so it's available there for you guys if you're interested. So I just kind of wanted to share with you some of those books that we have. So yes, don't forget to hit the like button. Really appreciate that. Okay, next question. Have you or your hubby, talking to Donita, heard of an end times teacher named Tom Stapleton? I have heard of him, but I don't remember if he's a good guy, bad guy, or what. I don't remember anything specific about him. I think he's from Canada. He's not affiliated with any denomination. Sometimes that can be good and sometimes that can be bad. So I have heard the name, but I don't know anything about him. If you know something specific that he teaches, you could let us know, and then I could comment on that teaching, whether it's debatable or something that's provable or good or bad or whatever. Question for later. How does the British Empire fit into the biblical timeline, as it still exists, but is not what it was? Yeah. Basically, as far as it fitting into that particular thing, we see that in the Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog-Magog war. It talks about they come against Israel. So there's one side that sides with Russia to attack Israel. There's another side that is pro-Israel. So that's Israel and Saudi Arabia and a few others. And then there's the West, which is kind of sort of with Israel, but they don't really do anything. It's what it looks like in the text. And it says that coalition from the West really is led by the ships of Tarshish. Now, when we go to Isaiah, it talks about when the children of Israel come back the second time, which was 1948, that whole thing will be facilitated by the people from Tarshish. The ships of Tarshish will be the first to bring the sons of Israel back to Israel and recreate Israel. We know that that mandate was given to the British Empire to carve up that particular part. So Tarshish is Great Britain. And it talks about the cubs of Tarshish specifically are the ones that are speak out against the Russian invasion. Now, a lot of people look at that and say that's all the people in the West that are associated with Britain, which is kind of sort of true. But the way that the text is, it's a group of cubs that kind of form their own coalition. So as far as looking at like Mexico, United States, Canada, South Africa, and other nations kind of spawned or controlled at once by Great Britain, there's only one group that is a group of cubs that come together. We had 13 colonies that formed a nation and then continued. So you're really speaking about America specifically. So Britain, America, and the others probably most likely would be against a Russian invasion. And so we have that there. So that's specific. But in most of those texts, it talks about, like, for instance, the beasts and the empires. The empires go away, the nations still remain. And in some cases, the nations are taken over or partner with someone else in the other empire. So Britain is definitely still around, still a power to be reckoned with, as with the United States, as we usually are together like that, with a fairly decent army and weapons and things like that. And so we still are existing at the time of the Magog invasion. And so I think that's going to come soon. I don't see it very quick because, right, it's Russia we're talking about, southern Russia. and or Ukraine. I mean, I suppose you could, put all that area together. But right now, the Ukraine and Russia are at war. They're exhausting their supplies with each other. So there's going to have to be a time when that's finally over, whatever happens. And then it stops, and Russia is going to have to take some time to rearm, get more weapons, buy more weapons, whatever, but a certain amount of time to restock. And then they could attack Israel again. So we'll see what happens. So I don't see it in the very near future, because we also have the prophecies of Israel taking back control of Gaza, southern Lebanon, Gilead, and continuing in the Golan Heights, and then expanding their territories in different ways, colonizing the Negev all the way down, and then certain groups that have not migrated yet migrate in. And there's quite a bit of change in the nation of Israel. Then we have the Psalm 84 or Psalm 83 war, where you've got 10 different terrorist groups in the area, not those countries that they're in, but the terrorist groups in the countries have to be eliminated, which may or may not be going on now, or maybe it's in pieces. So part of it's going on now, but it's in the process. So we've got all of this kind of stuff to happen. And apparently this war is going to take at least a couple of more years to totally finish, according to another Dead Sea Scroll. So we'll look at that later. But it's really interesting to pull these together. So the British Empire is specifically mentioned, along with the United States, in Ezekiel 38. So, but it's not like it was. The British Empire as an empire has kind of ceased to exist, but the nation is still there. And you'll see that with the same thing. Greece is still there. Iran is still here. It used to be the Great Persian Empire. It's trying to come back. So those kind of things. Hopefully that helps. Do you think Turkey calling for a confederation is a link to the Roman Empire? Very well could be. There's some texts that talk about stuff that Turkey does, and depending on how Rome fits in, that could very well be something. It's something I haven't quite figured out yet, but there's enough other documents that I think we can figure it out. Plus, in a few more years, it'll become more and more obvious. Right now, Turkey is wanting to recreate officially, not doing anything with it because they would be instantly attacked, but wanting to recreate the Ottoman Empire. And that would be interesting if there's enough time, and if they did, that would be a continuation of the Roman Empire, which means it's not over yet. But of course, they were defeated in World War II. Them with Turkey, with Germany rather, together, tried to come back, and that was World War II. So World War I and World War II. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, we need to definitely keep looking at Turkey, and which is, Constantinople or Istanbul, whatever you want to call it, but that was the center of both of the empires. So there's a link to the Roman Empire somewhere in there. Whether it continues or it's different or it's Russia or whatever, we'll see. George gifted 5 memberships, Level Angel. Thank you very much. Again, we appreciate you supporting the ministry. Question also for later: could the USA be part of the freed iron mixed with the clay? Oh, feet of iron. Yeah, feet rather. As it is made up of people descending from the old Roman Empire mixed with people from all over the world. That's one theory, that it's the empire mixed with just people in general. Obviously, the government of those 10 nations is very democratic. It says they mix their power or their seed with the seed of men. And that could be a Nephilim type thing, or there's several things like that. But it could also be simply saying that they are too democratic they mix their power with people in general. They can't get anything done because they're too democratic. They're not like an ironclad empire with a king. Or it could be all of those things. So those are things that we look at. So a lot of people think of the iron as the empire and the clay as people. Some of these ancient texts try to refer to the iron as the Roman Empire and the clay, the old Egyptian Empire. And I'm still not too sure how to go about figuring out which empire we're talking about and what the borders were. So that would be something that we need to study next for that. But those are definitely things to look at. Where does it say in the Bible that the 144,000 are evangelists? I've been all over the Bible and found zip. There is Ezra 9:4 and maybe Ezra 37 about the dry bones army from the four winds of heaven. Yeah, I think it's an assumption. We have the 144,000, and then the description of the fact that they're hunted, but they have special powers. The animals and the plagues don't bother them. They get to do specific things. If you think about it, what else would they be doing here for? I mean, they're not going to stand around and make animals go away and then not tell you about the Lord. So in a sense, anybody in that situation, even not the 144,000, are going to be doing evangelistic work. So it's kind of a given, but it doesn't say anything specific that that's their main goal is evangelism, or their main goal is something other than evangelism. We just have some of those little pieces. So good question, though. And we got to be careful of doing that because that's an assumption. It's probably correct. It may not be, but we got to make sure to remember the specifics of what the text actually does say and know that that's rock solid. And then the speculations may or may not be correct. So at this point, we want to just like list all those speculations and then see, make sure we don't forget one. Because if we're trying to figure out, is it one or two, and it's actually three, but we're never looking for three, we're going to miss it. So we need to look at all the possible theories, even though the ones that don't seem that it would be even a possibility, at least keep them in mind that someone had a theory about it being this way, and then wait and see what happens. Virginia gives a super sticker, $50. Thank you very much for the offering. Okay, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Regarding the Antichrist coming from Syria, isn't the area which belonged to Dan located in Syria? And he's also supposed to spring from Dan. Yeah, that's what makes it even more ironclad. The church fathers will talk about the Antichrist coming from the tribe of Dan. Again, the scriptures don't exactly say that, but there's a few hints. And the church fathers talk about those hints and say it's specific. And I won't go into what they are, but there's 3 or 4 scriptures that they use to say, hey, there's something there. So yeah, Dan was actually in 2 places. They moved, but one of their places was the northern part, the area of where Tel Dan is at. And that area is a little piece of Lebanon, part of northern Israel, and a little piece of Syria. So it's that area up there. So as far as coming from Dan, some people say that he's a descendant of some person who's from the tribe of Dan, which may or may not be. But at this point, I'm not sure how you would verify that I'm from Dan or I'm from some other tribe. There's some genetic markers for Cohens, but I don't know necessarily how you would prove anything like that. So in other words, somebody could always say, okay, that's a prophecy. I'm a Danite, So somebody claiming to be that. But actually born in the area of ancient Dan, part of which is Syria, becoming the king of Syria, and it may or may not be Muslim at the time. We're still talking in the future. Maybe real quick, maybe not. I doubt it's Assad, but if he's banished, he could be banished at any time, or accidentally killed or on purpose killed or whatever, or I'm sure he has sons. So, and of course, someone else can come in. Many times the entire kingly line, the entire dynasty is eliminated and then, or killed off or whatever, and then some new person becomes the king. So that happens a lot too. And those things can happen, in a month, just come in, wipe out, some sort of a war or whatever. So yeah, that's a good combination too. So he's called the King of the North, which is at that time was the Seleucid Empire in Syria. In what we just saw today, he's from one of the four horns, the one that would attack going west and attack going south. So that would have to be Syria. And it's not directly stated that he's a Danite or from Dan, but it's hinted at, and the church fathers say that that's what it means. So if you put the tribe of Dan with the king of the north, with Syria and the horns, they all point to the same area. So he's from that area, basically. So now that doesn't mean, and that's something that's, again, all the prophecies, you have to be specific. Even if that is absolutely for sure, there could be somebody that was born either in northern Israel or Lebanon or in Syria, born there, that picks up and say comes to America and studies, like a lot of people do, or in France or Germany or somewhere, and then returns and either takes over legitimately or forms a coup or whatever and becomes the king at that point. So there could be a lot of people that fit that criteria, but until they actually come and become the king, the king is what we're looking for. Or if they switch over and become a republic, the democratically voted in or cheated voted in or whatever, but the ruler of that area. So, and again, we don't know who that would be, but the 10 nations have to form first. So since there's no 10 nations formed, Assad is probably out of the picture, the current leader of Syria. So, but it's something we need to keep our eyes on. And remember, that was mainly from Hippolytus, so that could be wrong. It's not scripture. Some of it's scripture, some of it's not, but we could be mixing or interpret them wrong, but it's something we need to keep in mind. Can you speak to the tribe of Ephraim having the unicorn and the connection to the Antichrist, kind of mixing Egypt, the world, with Israel, prophetic of the place of the Antichrist comes from? I'm not really sure. I know the tribe of Ephraim has different different pictures for their tribe or different flags. So I'm not really too sure about that stuff, but I'll do some research in it and see what I can come up with. What are your thoughts as to why Persia is a ram in this vision, while it's a bear in the other vision? I think number one that it's the ram because that's the national symbol. So in that particular dream, it was doing national symbols. So ram and goat, it would be obviously Persia and Greece. Now, as before, we have the first one, we have the metals, so that doesn't tell us anything. But then the middle one, which is Daniel 7, a bear is something that's one of the most ferocious animals. In a lot of places, in a lot of, like, in Scandinavian countries, you have like werewolves or werebears or something like that. It's whatever the most ferocious animal is in that area. Bears, you need a team of people with bows and arrows, and then it's still uncertain. I mean, you'll end up killing the bear, but you don't take it down instantly. So, and same thing with wolves. You might be able to take a wolf down instantly, but they run in packs. And wolves are much larger than dogs, So whatever the creature is at that point. And as far as like Greece with the leopard is one of the fastest moving animals. And so that symbolized how fast Greece came in and took over. Whereas the bear was, a bear would be probably stronger. You don't mess with it. It takes its time. It can't be stopped, but it's a big, hefty person. So I think that's kind of what those symbols are. There may be more to it than that, but that would be interesting. If there is more to it, it would be interesting to look at it and see if that has any bearing on the whole Antichrist idea. So if you look at the first three with Nebuchadnezzar, it's a lion that becomes like a man. So he was totally arrogant and then he became humble. So I'm assuming if there's a connection to the Antichrist, it's showing that the Antichrist would be extremely arrogant. So he might be diplomatic at first, but if you got to know him or looked at it carefully, he's very arrogant, would have people killed, etc., mafia type thing. And then the bear, same thing. The bear is okay until it gets hungry, or maybe it's hibernating. And when you poke it, you regret it. And then the leopard is so fast, you never see it coming. And then the nondescript beast is totally different from the others. It's an air beast. So in Hebrew, we would call that a ziz. But it would just, you're normally not looking up because everything else that you fight is down here. So that would sweep in undetected and kill you or take you off. So I think a lot of those things are very similar points that we should somehow compare to the Antichrist or the Antichrist kingdom. When he does take over, he doesn't have much time. So he's going to have to come in fast like Greece. He's going to have to be very vicious like a bear. So it'll be interesting to kind of see. Can the Antichrist wear 3 crowns? He becomes the Assyrian, the kings of Tyre and New Babylon both are commanded as Satan, or condemned rather as Satan. Could the 3rd crown be Syria or Assyria? I'm not sure. If you're talking about the 3 crowns in Gad, that's an interesting idea. One of the things you got to remember for the same thing with these, in the text it talks about the king of Tyre and then the prince of Tyre. That's specifically talking about the Antichrist. So that fits really well. But there's something about the Tyre, either his arrogance, his pride, his something, or his patience or whatever. There's something there that it is connected. So in one way, he's like the description of the king of Babylon, the king of Tyre, the king of Zidon, the king of Egypt, the king of Syria, the king of Assyria, and then others. There's a few others in there. But the symbolism is interesting. It's not necessarily that he's controlling all those or he's the king of all those, but there's something about those. And we have to go back and read the text. The arrogance, when he's Rahab, the dragon in Egypt, he is the king of the children of pride, the scripture says. So the whole point is that pride area. So lots of things like that. So that could be. So again, those are good things to think about and see how they would come out to be. Do you have thoughts on how Christ is represented as a ram's horn in Enoch and as a ram is substituted for Isaac in Genesis? Yeah, there's a few things that I had learned a ways back from a Messianic teacher, a friend of mine. The idea that the ram's horn, one of the things I thought was interesting is that the 2 horns of the ram are called the first and the last trump. I think it was. I'll have to look that up. And there's actually 3 horns of God. So there's the first trump, the last trump, and the great trump. And so those represent Pentecost, Yom Teruah, and then Yom Kippur. And so prophetically, that would represent the beginning of the church, the rapture of the church, the beginning of the millennial reign. So when you see in scripture, a lot of times something looks like a rapture, but it's not quite, and you're not sure what it is you're talking about, like in Matthew 24, look very carefully and see if it's first trump, last trump, or great trump. That'll give you a good picture on what we're talking about. So, yeah, and then in Enoch, I'm not really sure. The ram's horn, a lot of times, is the sounding of an army to attack or retreat or whatever. And so we have the sounding of the horn as the time of the rapture, and probably other things too. But it's just when God finally declares it, whether or not there's a real horn that human beings would hear. It's a specific thing representing the time, the time of the instant transaction, so to speak. So the time of the rapture, the time of the second coming, the time of Pentecost, or other things like that. So, and it is interesting, the text in Genesis, in Hebrew, it talks about how Isaac says, I see the wood and for the fire, and I see this and the place and everything, but I don't see the goat, or the lamb. Where is the sacrifice? And it literally says in Hebrew that God will provide for himself, not for himself, but will provide himself a sacrifice. And that can be translated, he will provide a sacrifice for himself, or it can be translated very literally, he will provide himself as the sacrifice. And traditionally, that was on Mount Moriah, which is where Jesus would have been crucified. So we have that prophecy, that symbolism, and that place, all referring to the Messiah's first coming and death on the cross. So it's really fascinating to look at that stuff. And I think it's, even if you're just interested in end time prophecy, if you look at all of those and get a feel for how the prophecies are, and then there's a few of them that seem odd that are going to probably be that kind of prophecy, but they've never been fulfilled, as far as we know, then they're probably something in the future, which probably has to deal with second coming prophecies. So that's why we'd really want to pull all those together. Do you think the 10 kings gain power before or after the rapture? Well, if it's after the rapture, it's going to have to be a very, very quick turnaround for them to come to power, to not agree, and then be taken over by the Antichrist, because all that whole situation has to be in less than 3.5 years, which is possible, but it seems more likely that the 10 nations would come to power before the rapture. And most of the early church fathers were pre-trib rapture people. We see that in our book we teach that on our YouTube videos, some of our YouTube videos on the rapture, and then our book on the pre-trib rapture. But with that in mind, they also talk about, like Irenaeus, who said that don't even look for the Antichrist. I mean, here's three examples of three different names that equal 666 that are common names in Latin back in the day, Latin or Greek or whatever. And so the idea is, like, you can always find somebody somewhere whose name equals 666. So what you want to do is wait till there's 10 nations, and then an 11th one attacks and seems to destroy 3, and that king or one of the rulers of that nation will have a name that equals 666. Maybe there'll be 2 of them, like a joint something, and you'll be able to quickly identify which one is the Antichrist. So, but those all have to go together. So in my opinion, I'm thinking it's probably before the rapture. So I'm not looking for anybody that would fit the bill of being the Antichrist yet. If it's all relatively close, he's probably alive, and maybe you could identify him. But what we definitely are told to look for specifically are the rise of the 10 nations out of the revived Roman Empire. Roman, Egyptian combination, iron and clay, something like that. We need to keep our eyes open for all of that stuff. Super chat, $20. Thank you very much for the donation. Really appreciate it. Now that the AI is just about everything, will that be the image of the beast? That's a possibility. Looking at the backside of that, right now, it's just not ready yet. It's got a lot of possibilities. I mean, even if you were like for the AI, the point being, and I keep up on this on the tech side, because number one, we want privacy. Windows is going crazy with their spyware, the AI built in and the other things like that, the Copilot and the recall. Again, it may not be a big deal. It's not exactly right now a big deal, but you see them going down that road. So I'm in the process of converting all my computers to Linux. I've still got 3 of them that I'm keeping Windows for a little while, because some things don't work on this. So this particular program is being done on a computer that I re-imaged on Linux, and so it's all Linux at the moment. So that's open source, so we know there's no spyware in it. Anyway, so I keep up on all those kind of things. The thing about the AI, though, is that right now, if you go, and maybe they've switched over, but it used to be you go to Google or somewhere, and basically it has a large database. And I say I'm wanting to know about fishing poles that are the color blue that I could buy, that are less than $20 or whatever, and you have 3 or 4 things like that, it can fairly quickly find that. And it doesn't take a whole lot of energy to do that. When you have an AI thing that is going to artificially scan everything, try to figure out what you mean, do a query based on that, even if it's more specific, and is better. Still the compute power search. And so there's been Reclaim the Net had an article the other day. They are an excellent group as far as looking at privacy and what's going on in the world. But they had an article about the United States reviving 3 Mile Island, getting it patched up, getting it going, specifically to power the Microsoft AI. That was like a deal in the works. It may or may not have went through, but that gives you an idea. If we can have all these search engines just working on the normal grid, and you have a big one like that that's going to take a nuclear power plant to power it, that's just crazy, and Linus, the guy that runs or that is in the head of actually invented the Linux kernel and is heading that, he's basically saying the same thing. It's like it's 90% a joke, but they keep pushing it. They can use it for other things, but it's just at this point it's very, very iffy. Much like the electric cars, even if they were cheap and we could all buy 20 of them, the point being, if you live in a large city and there's ever a time in the middle of summer where they do ask you to reduce your stuff or have a rolling blackout because they can't make enough energy to cool everybody, on top of that, you're going to want me to charge electric vehicles. It's just, that's insane. Get the grid fixed first. Now, if the technology develops and the car has its own solar panels and charges itself, then that would fix the problem. Then I'd have them on my house and there'd be no grid problem. And, that'll probably get there eventually. But when they try to force it through legislation, it's not going to fly. Everything's going to destroy itself. But eventually the technology will be there. And so we're definitely going that direction. Right now, there's some major problems with it. But that just tells me that we're not quite there for that. But it's something we need to watch. I'm not opposed to using AI. I've used it to create some graphics. And when it works, it's great. And most of the time, it doesn't work very well. So I kept trying to tell it. Well, I think you've seen a couple of my videos where it's a golden book with prophecy with some Hebrew writing on it. You'll notice it's not Hebrew writing. I kept trying to explain Hebrew, language Hebrew, and it just did not know what it was. It just made funny little characters, and I finally looks good enough, But I mean, that's an example, and we've had a lot of problems, some legal problems with it too and stuff. So we will see what happens. AI is definitely something to keep our eye on. It might be part of that. If it is, it's going to be a little while, but we'll see what happens. I mean, they keep inventing things. If they invent, like in the 1950s, something about the size of a calculator today took up an entire room or a floor of a building, and now you've got a little laptop or a little bitty computer, or even our cell phones, billions of times more powerful. So in another 30 years or so, or what the military maybe has now, that are being developed. I hear all this stuff with Elon Musk about the robots that will be available to the public in the next 2 years. Just right on the inside of the last Jubilee. I think that was interesting. And the supposed self-driving cars, right now they have problems, so nobody can get them. But they're working on them. And then the Starlink, the internet for everybody, now they're talking about using Starlink to do your cell phones. So if I'm somewhere where my cell phone cannot get a signal, it should be able to just simply use the satellite. I don't know what that's going to cost, but bottom line, it would be possible. So there's all these things, technology is increasing by leaps and bounds. So we don't know where we're going to be really even in the next year. So we're going to see. It's got to have something to do with it, because there's no way that you could put a mark on everybody and require that to buy and sell unless somehow there's something watching you, tracking you. But then we got the facial recognition and then all the other things that are going on. So it's definitely going that direction. As Christians that resist the Antichrist system, which is what we're commanded to do, so it would be a sin not to, some of the things we can do is make sure that our representatives know that we do not like such and such, and we need to have legislation making that kind of stuff illegal. I live in Kansas, and we've done a lot of that already. No Sharia law, it's totally illegal. None of these backwards Google searches for people because it's an invasion of privacy. That's illegal. So Kansas is not a bad place to be, but it has its problems. We still have the abortion laws, for instance, totally horrible. But those kind of things we have to work on, and we'll see what happens once the rapture happens and all of us are gone. The troublemakers are all gone. Then everything is going to get very, very wicked very fast. Can we pray for Christians across the nation to stand together to pray for our nation to return to Jesus and vote biblical values? Definitely. We didn't need to do that. And I know it's, this is Monday when I'm doing this broadcast. Tomorrow is election day. If you haven't already done it, please get out and vote. My pastor made a comment the other day that we need to. It's very serious if we're inclined to do that. I love my pastor, but he should have been a little bit bolder to simply say it is our civic duty to do this. So if you're looking at Romans about obeying the government in any way, shape, or form, it's our civic duty to vote. Now, granted, a lot of people are going to say it's not going to make any difference because they're going to cheat and they're going to do what they want anyway. Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. In either case, when we stand before God and say, I did everything I possibly do, and he said, well done, my grateful servant, or we're going to say, well, I figured that it wouldn't do any good anyway, so I didn't even bother. I'm not sure what he's going to say about that. So most important is we want our relationship with the Father to be correct. So we want to do that. We went ahead and voted last week because there's the early voting. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's not a good thing, but we tried our best. So we're working at that. So yeah, we definitely need to do that. So please get out and vote if you haven't already. Try to watch what you're doing and make sure nothing glitches, and that kind of thing. So that's a very good point. We need to do that. What are your thoughts on the papacy being the Antichrist, uprooting 3 barbarian tribes, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, and Vandals? Do you think that these barbarian groups are connected to 10 tribes of the north? Well, if it was to happen again, that's a definite possibility. A lot of the old ones considered the Pope of Rome to be the Antichrist, or at least the false prophet, however that works together. You see Roman Catholicism and Islam being described in the book of Gad as something to be, reckoned with. And so they're playing a part somewhere in all of this. If you're talking about when it was sacked and there were the barbarian tribes back then, it's been several thousand years, or at least 1,500 years or better. And the 10 toes haven't emerged. So they back then, definitely it was not part of it. But if it happens again, that's a good thing, another good example of what happened before to be looking again, especially if those barbarian tribes are all from the area of what used to be the Roman Empire. So we'll see what happens between that and Rome and see what happens. I kind of doubt it, but it's worth looking into. There's definitely could be a part of something like that. Do you see in your studies of the biblical text and the Dead Sea Scrolls that there is a gap between the rapture and the start of the tribulation? And if so, how big is the gap? Okay. I don't know for sure, but what I'm thinking is, and you can go back and look at the text on the rapture part, one of the major texts that I consider a rapture passage is Daniel chapter 12. In chapter 12, it talks about the time of the resurrection. And then along with the resurrection, there are those that are shining. That would be a glorified body, if you take it literally. So there's a rapture resurrection at the beginning of Daniel chapter 12. And then it talks about time and a half a time, which is 1260 days. You see that multiple times in Daniel and in Revelation. So between the time of the rapture and the time of the abomination that makes desolate and the persecution is a time and a half. And then not another time and a half, but a 1290 days, 30 extra days between the time of the abomination / persecution to when all of this is over is that amount of time. So we have the 7-year tribulation with either a 30-day gap in the middle, meaning both of them somehow are overgapped, or an extra 30 days at the beginning. So I could see possibly up to 30 days of a gap if there is one. And it's very possible that there's no gap. So that's my reading of Daniel 12. I could be wrong, but that would be my thoughts. So I don't see a gap of a long period of time. Plus, in the book of Enoch, it talks about the time when the group of people are taken away. And the reasoning for that, I think it's in chapter 50 or 56 or somewhere, it says that the reason for that is to engender repentance. Okay, so in other words, the idea is that we've told everybody about the gospel and the rapture, and they've said we're idiots. Then all of a sudden the rapture happens. It's one last time for them to go, wait a minute, you mean that whole thing was real? Which means that good guy over there is not a good guy, he's an Antichrist, and there's a 7, and it all happens. And so it's a last-ditch effort for them to say, this is all real. I have one shot left to get right with the Lord. And so it's to engender repentance. It's not because we deserve to be taken out. It's just one more plan of his to show a mighty act to get people to pay attention. They're the last ones. So that would be my idea. Either no gap or up to 30 days would be my idea based on Daniel 12. Nothing that I can think of in the scrolls specifically saying anything about a gap or anything like that. Just Daniel 12. Iron meaning machine and clay meaning atom, combined man and machine. That is one of the theories of transhumanism type stuff. And that is a possibility. That is definitely something we need to look for. I don't know that that's what we're talking about in Revelation, but again, don't throw any theory away because we could go down the wrong hole and then totally miss the thing. So we want to keep tabs on the AI, transhumanism, the biology behind it, the cyborg type stuff coming out, the robots, the cars, all this stuff, to keep an eye on it and see where it goes. One of the things, all those things look really good as far as like Elon Musk and Starlink and all that stuff. But one of the things that should scare all of us is this idea of the implant, so that you're directly connected to the internet. And I understand good could come of it. The idea if I'm paralyzed and that could somehow form a new neural link and I could all of a sudden start walking and talking and being normal again, that's cool. But what else can it do? Again, we have to keep tabs on this technology, and at least with laws that make certain parts illegal and things like that. And then there's also the Nephilim technology coming back, the mixtures of species, which they're doing experiments with. And to do a half human, half something else, and run it all the way to a birth is illegal in the United States. That doesn't mean it's not being done. It's technically illegal, which is at least a good thing, a start. We're warned in the scrolls about Nephilim medicine coming back. And if you know what to look for, we're seeing a lot of that. And so that's why my family and we're trying to follow the Essene path as far as the health stuff, the herbs and the medicine, and start doing the different things. So we're doing that. We're feeling better. We're noticing some results. So, it's all those things kind of come together. They're all prophecies if you want to look at it that way. So I'm not sure how much that goes with what we're talking about, like Revelation, but it's something to definitely keep in mind. So what about their seed mixed with men's seed? Yeah, that's in Daniel 2. And it's either, I mean, it could be saying several things. We could be talking about Nephilim, mixing their seed with the seed of men, so another Nephilim creation type thing, which could be as simple as using that technology to do it, which gets us back to the AI and the stuff from the previous question. We could also be talking about they being the kings, the 10 kings of those 10 nations, mixing their seed or their power with the seed of men. So in other words, giving up some of their power to do some sort of democratic republic voting type thing. And because of that, every time they vote, especially if it's 10, if they all had one vote, it's always going to be 5 against 5 and nothing's ever going to get done. If they were 9 kingdoms or 11 kingdoms, the vote would always come out one way or the other. But it could be something like that. It could be several things. So that's one of the things we don't know. So far as I can tell, there's nothing about it in the early church fathers, nothing about that specifically in the scrolls. It's one quote in Daniel 2, which is kind of odd. I think most people that don't believe in the Nephilim stuff would probably say it's got to be, a democratic problem that they come. And it very well might be either way. But it's either way, we need to look for the 10 nations. We need to try to hold our ground here in this country by talking to our representatives, get to know them by name, talk to them. If you think there's a way of doing something better, talk to them, have them, that's their job, is to create some sort of a draft of something that you want done and present it to the Senate. The Senate can say, forget about it, or maybe actually do something with it. But if enough of us get together and say, we don't want seatbelts anymore, or whatever, or we want double something or whatever. If there's enough people that say that's what we want, then they'll probably do some sort of a bill on it. And maybe not, but I mean, that's our responsibility, our civic duty, and the civic duty and the job of our representatives. So we just need to, but we need to keep an eye on all this stuff and make sure it doesn't go too far as best as we can. What does it mean that the Antichrist comes in his own name? I think at the height of his power, he creates his own religion. He destroys the Babylonian mystery religion that actually helped him get into power. He comes against that. He takes over the 10 nations. Once he's in full power, he comes in his own name with his own religion and his own way of doing something. He doesn't give credit to God. He is his own thing. Very prideful, very arrogant. And it might be more than that, but I think that's the main part of what it's talking about. So last question is, thank you for your studies. They have really enriched my understanding of the Bible. Well, I'm glad. It's really good to hear that stuff. I do have a question. Daniel's prophecy of the feet and the toes uses the word mixed. The word in Aramaic is Arab. Yes, it is. Arav means to mix or something together. So it could be a coincidence. It could not be. The thing about the Arabs, most Arabs are Muslim. Most Muslims go by Sharia law. I don't know how that would be like a mixed, unless you have, like if they're all Arab Muslim groups, most of which go by Sharia law and some don't, which actually, even if they technically do for the people, the kings will do whatever they want. So yeah, that is another interesting thing. I don't think it really means anything. It's E-R-A-V, Rav, in Hebrew, but it can very easily be spelled A-R-A-B, which in English means Arab. I don't know what the Arabs call themselves in Arabic, if it's Rav or what it is, but that is a good point. Something to keep an eye on. So what I would do is probably look that up in the Hebrew language and because we know what it is in English, it's Arab, but in the Hebrew language and in the Arabic language, what do they both call Arabs? So is it the same as an Arav or Arab? If it is, then there might be something to this. If they both call it something totally different, then it's probably not. So yeah, it's a normal Hebrew word for mixed, but it is worth looking into. So good point. Okay. That's all of our questions. So we'll go ahead and we'll come back next week and continue our studies with this, and we'll see where we get from there. There are some interesting scrolls I'm looking at. I'm trying to take time to go through. Well, I'm getting ready for Branson, so that's one thing. That's less than a month away now. So we're going to be there with Prophecy Watchers. I'm looking at the Hebrew versions of New Testament, those that are out there. Those are very interesting. There are several groups that are studying on it now, and I think it's worth looking into. I'm not taking the position that they are the original and the Greek is a translation of them. Um, in my mind, it could be either or, and it really doesn't matter, because the point being is that we have the Greek, that's our standard. We will have the Hebrew, we have the North and South Coptics, we have the Georgian, we have the Aramaic, and then I think we have one or two other, the Old Latins, if we can. Most people haven't done any work on that either. So if we can get the first century copies of all the different languages, it doesn't matter who copied who, they would be fairly faithful, and each language would have some words that are different than others and some that are the same. So comparing them all together, we get a better understanding of the text in general. So these Hebrew versions are really amazing. Like I was going through John chapter 1 the other day, and it surprised me because I wasn't looking for it, but in the Greek it says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Hebrew version is really specific. It says, in the beginning was the Son of God, and the Son of God was with God, and the Son of God was God. Very, very specific. So it's some of the cults that are non-Trinitarian, I'm not sure what they're going to do with that, other than simply say, oh, it's a corrupt translation, and just be done with it. But really interesting things like that. There's some, most of the text is identical with the Greek as far as the meanings go, but there's some interesting little differences in Revelation and in other places. Some different words, some different groups mentioned by name, some extra stuff. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm working on Jude and James at the moment, and I heard a rumor about the Thessalonian letters being available. So those I definitely want to look at, see if there's any difference in 2 Thessalonians 2, for instance. Maybe some more details on the 7-year tribulation period, something like that. So anyway, we'll eventually get to all that stuff. It's going to be a fascinating study. And I pray that Trump gets in, because I really feel that if the Democrat Party gets in, they're going to be pro-Muslim. They're going to try to force the status quo. And the only thing I'm thinking of is digging for scrolls. They're going to be told, you got to leave it alone. It belongs to someone else. You got to figure out something to do. So if Trump gets in, though, he's going to recognize Israel as Israel, because it's pretty obvious archaeologically. And if it's your land, dig, especially if you can just, make a translation, sell it to somebody, make some money. That's what a businessman would do, And so we will see the prophecies of Israel's expansion, I believe, in the next few years, if I'm reading the 70-year prophecy right in the scrolls. And if Trump gets in, I think that it's probably all together. If he doesn't, everything is put off, in my mind, another 4 years or better. So we'll see what happens. Could be either or, but I'm trying to get as much as I can done in preparation for hopefully the next 4 years of digging for things. So anyway, we'll see what happens. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. Thank you, guys, and we will see you